This week on Merchants of Change, we talk with one of Cape Cod's finest, Brian Kolb. Brian played hockey at the College of the Holy Cross before a quick cup of coffee in the Federal League. Brian is a good friend and a seasoned sales pro who currently is selling software for TideLift. TideLift helps organizations effectively manage the open source behind modern applications. Here he is, Brian Kolb. I'm JR Butler, co-founder of the Shift Group, and you're listening to Merchants of Change. This is a podcast about transferring the skills and behaviors we acquire as athletes into being a professional technology salesperson. Each week, we'll introduce you to a top performer who will help us understand how they became professional merchants of change. What's up, kid? How we doing?
Brian Kolb.
What's happening? Nice to see you, fellas.
This is a good one today.
This is awesome. We were just talking before we recorded, John. I'm like, probably 98% of the stories that me and Brian have together aren't going to make this episode. So we're going to keep it PG-13, all right?
Absolutely.
So Brian, thank you so much for joining. It's weird to call you Brian. I'm sure you've had a chance to listen to a few of the episodes, right? We're talking, the audience we're talking to is really like athletes transitioning into sales or considering transitioning into sales. And most of the people we've talked to are all former athletes, and we like to start in the sports background. So you're a Cape Cod kid. Tell us a little bit about your experience growing up playing sports.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on. I think it's, growing up, I don't think one sport, two sports, three sports. I lived in a large neighborhood where everyone was playing everything. So from baseball, soccer, football, lacrosse, pretty much did it all. Up until high school, right? And so then you had to kind of narrow it down, and it ended up being soccer, hockey, lacrosse, and then eventually hockey in college. But on the way, you get to meet a lot of good people, a lot of good friends, a lot of relationships built over those times. And I don't know, I kind of liked playing more than one sport, more than just specializing in one, right? Because by the time you get sick of one season or sick of some people, you're on to a new team and new friends and new experiences. So it definitely shaped me, who I was growing up, made me competitive, and obviously translated well to the work world.
What are some of your favorite memories from playing all those sports growing up?
Yeah, I think the first time traveling with a team, like staying overnight in a hotel, right? You get the knee hockey in the hallways all night when the dads are out boozing.
Unreal.
And then, getting ready to get back in and jump in the pool as soon as you're back, the staying up all night playing video games. It was a lot of fun. And then, as you get older, I think in high school, I think JR was on the receiving end of one of the better experiences for me. Tabor, we were kind of in a underdog type scenario playing Cushing, but we ended up pulling that off, making it to the finals. Unfortunately, we lost to Jonathan Quick and the Avon Old Farms, but that was my first real glimpse of playing what I knew half that team was probably going to be either in the AHL or NHL at some point. But that was the first time where I think I realized that maybe I could keep up and play with the big boys.
Yeah, I was super excited when I got to Holy Cross and found out there was a kid from Tabor on the team. Like, just really, really excited to have that conversation.
Well, do you remember when we first met, JR? And you were playing baseball at Tabor.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah. And I love your comment about multiple sports, dude. There's so much specialization now. I get to follow you and your boys on Instagram and seeing how multifaceted their athletic careers are becoming. I can see that's going down a generation. I think that's unreal.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's fun. You see a lot of yourself and your kids, the good and the bad. But luckily, my oldest is very competitive into sports, and right now it's a lot of basketball and flag football, which is great.
Yep. So keeping it in the guardrails, Cobra. His favorite memory from Holy Cross days.
On the ice, it's obviously the Minnesota thing, right? When we upset Minnesota, that was, I think for a lot of us, we kind of knew it was our pinnacle or our peak, but I think off the ice, it had to be freshman year, I think, when we all thought we were going to end up doing that run, like the campus run and with Koskinen and Sully and McKay, and all of a sudden we're all mad and bitching that I think it was Sully wasn't there and he was skipping out. And as we start running, he comes out in a Speedo on rollerblades or roller skates with pictures of beer. Let's go, boys. And we had ourselves a day. We almost collapsed 33 Caro that day. So that was definitely like the first. I was like, holy shit, welcome to college. Like, that was a blast.
That was an unreal day.
It was.
That's, I used to be jealous of you guys on the hockey team, like I'm over here at the football team and I don't know, we didn't even come close to what you guys had. And then the Minnesota win, like it's pretty incredible. But I feel like as JR mentioned, you guys talk about multiple sports. At Holy Cross in our day, I think we had a great relationship with every sports team. Like I thought that was a little bit unique for us. Usually the lacrosse team doesn't like the hockey team or the football team, but I don't know. I felt like with us, it was always kind of, we're all hanging out on Caro or Cambridge.
Yeah, except for a couple of I'm sure the baseball guys would have a different opinion about me, but that's all right.
Cool. Other than me, obviously, who is a couple of your favorite teammates?
Yeah, I think, obviously I'm best friends with Benny Conway.
Cheddar.
Cheddar Ben. Have been since day one. I think he's really the one that kind of taught me how it works to be an athlete there and what's expected out of you, and showed me some of the shortcuts that, Coach Pearl probably noticed that I picked up on pretty quickly there. And the leadership there, I think McGregor and Napper-Fournette and Pierre were the first real solid captains I think I had playing sports, where what they said and what they did, one, was more vocal than the other, but they were definitely great leaders. And obviously what we accomplished as a team that year was incredible. But it was in our class, JR, there was a lot of us. So I think the relationships kind of evolved over time. I'm a little bit closer with some of the older guys in the team still now, where I know my class is pretty close or our class is pretty close. And I think that just happens for, I obviously didn't play senior year for some personal reasons. I lost a few of my friends going into spring, and that's difficult. And I still think about it today. But then again, like, even though I don't hang out with those guys all the time, or we're not talking consistent basis, when I need them, they're there. Perfect example is when, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, my father had a pretty serious brain injury, and he was going in for brain surgery, and it just so happened that Cal St. Denis knew the surgeon pretty well, and we were having a hard time talking with the doctor, and Cal went straight from our golf tournament there straight to the hospital, got the introduction done, and it was just a big deal at the time. It just shows how close these guys are to one another.
Yeah, well, once a teammate, always a teammate. I think it's right. Wild, especially when you go through the shared experience that we all had, because that was such a special experience. Like, I just think so fondly of those days, and I think it had a lot of characteristics of like any winning team, right? Like, we were all so close, we spent so much time together. We knew so much about each other, probably too much. And it was just unreal. So I'd love to get into, again, we've really never talked about this. So I'm really excited to talk about the transition. I think I would love to know, how did you end up in sales?
Yeah. So great question. I think at Holy Cross, right, we didn't really have a business major per se, right? So, there's economics, but that really was a business. And so I was a psychology major, and it naturally led the competitiveness and sort of the learning about how people do things the way they do things, or sales is kind of a natural transition based on my personality. It was pretty clear that a lot of our teammates were going to go into medical device sales. I don't think that was right for me at the time per se. So I went in the financial world like everyone else, right? So I worked for Merrill Lynch as a financial advisor. Probably 2008 was probably the worst fucking year to ever do that. So I think like,
Yep.
excuse me, 2 weeks into work, I'm like sitting in my terminal and I'm like, oh, Bank of America just bought us. Turn to my boss. He's like, what? I'm like, oh God, here we go. So that ended quickly. That ended pretty quickly. Like legit, some woman came in, just slipped a piece of paper to the whole office and just says, yeah, you're done today. You're terminated. And I was like, okay. Luckily, one guy still had the company card. So we went to Buff's Pub down in Newton's, ran up a big tab there. But so it took a few years after that to really figure it out. I think it actually was a friend that I grew up with that I heard bought a house at like 25 years old. And I was like, how do you do that? And so always in software sales. So it was right around the time the iPhone kind of came out too, where I was kind of figuring around with apps and whatnot, and came across this company called Kolb. They did speech analytics. So basically, like, could transcribe this conversation we're having now and analyze it. And it was more for customer service for companies. But that was the first time I kind of heard of such a thing. And so I started at the bottom as a BDR, worked my way up, and kind of found my specialization in helping, Series A, Series B type companies where they have sort of maybe 1 mil to 5 mil in revenue, and they really want to hit that hyper growth and sort of create those repetitive processes. So I've done that for like 7 startups now.
Dude, it's so funny, Kolb, to hear you explain that, because I was the same boat. I'm like, economics, I go get a job at a bank. They're like, hey, kid, do you want to analyze some mortgage-backed securities that are kind of questionable? And I'm like, sure. And then it's like 2008 and no one's hiring. I'm just like, well, this looks bad. Like all this data looks real bad. They're like, this is real bad. And then some kids like I knew were talking, and they're like, so-and-so bought a condo and just bought a Jeep. And I'm like, what? Like, how do they buy a condo? Like, we're like young, like we're not making money. I'm like, why do they do software sales? So it's funny how like we go to Holy Cross, great school. And then somebody tells us, oh yeah, software sales. Like that's really what happened, I think, with a lot of people. It still does today.
It's crazy.
It is. I don't think people we get it because we went through it. It's hard for people to really understand what coming out of college in 2008 was like if you didn't do it. I don't think people quite appreciate, like right now we're in a recession. It's not like back then. Like people were jumping out of buildings in New York City. Like it was a bloodbath. And I think it makes us like a really special and unique kind of almost like a micro generation of, we understand everything before the iPhone because Kolb, I'm sure you were like me calling 1-800-COLLECT on a payphone after hockey practice and being like, practice is done, mom, pick me up, before she had to pay for it. Right.
Absolutely.
But then we also had like Facebook junior and senior year. So there's like stuff on the internet that's going to prevent us from running for president someday. So like we get both experiences. What would be your like biggest piece of advice for an athlete that's listening to this, that's about to transition out of the athletic world into civilian life?
Yeah, I think it's, first in terms of choosing your company and sort of the product, or like getting into sales, you gotta, I think you realize, one, going to work for someone that has your best interest at stake, or someone that's going to take you under their wing and kind of show you the ropes, is pretty important when you first get started, because there's a lot, it's like drinking through a fire hose, right? There's so many applications or sales software that you need to get accustomed to, and then find your sort of your cadence and what you're selling. And what I mean is, there's no silver bullet when you go company to company, right? I think the hard work and consistency is there, but I've had some success with emails, I've had some success with phone calls, and usually it's the blending of a few. But if someone just getting started, it's be open-minded, and really see what others are doing around you, the more experienced reps. And you'll kind of find your own way there by pretty much failure, right? I think it's maybe you don't fail, but you learn at that pace. But it's not easy. So there's a lot of no's to get that yes, and it can be frustrating. So just make sure you have that attitude going in that, it is lucrative. We do get paid a lot when things go well, but there's a reason why. You're dealing with a lot of failure and skepticism when you're trying to reach out to these people. And from 2008 till now, it's insanely hard to get someone on the other end to speak with you live. It's a lot different. You used to be able to call people's, desk phones, and pretty much non-existent now. So, I would say just have thick skin and find the right mentor.
I think that's great advice, Kolb. And going back to JR's point about the 1-800-COLLECT, like our age group, right? We have a little bit of different skills than other people. I still remember, not even 1-800-COLLECT, but I used to walk around my neighborhood and knock on doors and be like, hey, is Mike home? Like, if you did that today, like, it would be a serious problem.
Exactly. The Ring doorbell goes off and you're on the neighborhood, Facebook group. Who is this guy asking for money?
Yeah, but it's a good reminder to stay open-minded in sales, because even now, all the technologies we're using in sales today weren't available in 2008, 2009. It's just constantly evolving. I got a question for you. So let's say, some of our listeners come to you. One of them comes to you and says, hey, Brian, I got 3 job offers on the table. Like, the OTE is this, the salary, the base is this, this one has good benefits. I get my contact lenses for free. Like, what are some of the factors that you would kind of consider most important when looking at a job offer if you're fresh starting over as a BDR?
Yeah, I think when you're going into sales, money should be the most important thing driving you, or you wouldn't be in sales. But so I always look at the OTE, but the upside, right? Like, how much is this company going to allow you to grow in your role? And, not oftentimes put guardrails in on like how much you can earn. It should be, unlimited cap, right? And I think what you balance with that, though, is, again, the reputation of the company you're going to. Do your homework on the company itself. Ask around. I think everyone at this point, especially our networks, might probably know someone that's either been there or has a friend that's worked there. But do your homework, not only on the product and the company, but the people you're going to be working for. Ask the reps, how many of them have achieved quota in the last quarter or two? What's the turnover like? Ultimately, money is important, but I think when you're just starting as a BDR, knowing that you have the potential to earn as hard as you work, that's probably what you want to look for when you first get going, is making sure you're comfortable with, the cash flow they're going to offer you for your base. And then knowing that based on either bonuses or commission, that you have that upside without any cap. And I think a lot of companies do that now. The more money you make, the more money the company makes, everyone wins.
Do you have an opinion for BDR specifically on in-office or remote? Like, what are your thoughts on that? That's a huge, by the way, as you can imagine, this generation coming out of college now, they're almost picking technology sales because of the flexibility. And I obviously have my own opinion, if you can't tell. What is your thought on like remote versus in office for that first role?
First role, I think you should be. It would be nice if you'd be in an office, because there's nothing like hearing that guy across the cube from you, or down the hall, like they're pounding the phones, or you hear the success they're having or failures they're having. You can hear them do their pitch and kind of use it to your own, but that's the fastest way you're going to learn. I think listening to these Zoom calls, it can be frustrating, right? You don't get, a lot of people just read the transcripts. You don't get the tone. But there's nothing like in person hearing everyone kind of doing the same thing. Like, my first job was a boiler room. I was legit in New York, as in Long Island, and I was calling doctors at ERs. I had like that, just like you see in Boiler Room, the movie. Had a deck of cards, had 2 phones. As soon as I got a guy on the phone, I had to give it to the senior rep, but I learned very quickly, as there was 10 of us doing it at the same time, what works, what doesn't work, and then you adapt your own style. Hybrid role, I think it's tough for that role. I think everyone's trying to do it, but I've seen, and this is why I love what you guys are doing with the shift group, is training these guys right. I think that these BDRs are just hitting these MBOs to get paid and then hiding. And they get away with a lot these days. And the current role I'm at now, I'm on to my third BDR because of turnover.
Yeah.
So it's hard to train them one-on-one without, one, hurting their feelings sometimes. And two, they're only going off of metrics they see in Salesforce or something. They're not seeing like the work that really goes into that. Who's successful and who's not. So some of them pick up bad habits, but if you're not there every day, the training's once a quarter usually for us. So you can pick up a lot of bad habits between trainings.
Yeah. I love that. I think flexibility is a good reason if you like autonomy and you eventually want to get to the point where you can golf on a Wednesday at 1 o'clock in the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon, then yeah, technology sales is a great career track, but they need to understand that flexibility and that autonomy is earned, right? Like I was tied, like you said, I was tied to 2 phones for 2 years before I ever got the right to go get a haircut on an afternoon on a weekday, right? Like you got to get there. And I think there's a little bit of entitlement about the flexibility earlier on in your career.
The same in sports, JR. Yeah, not to cut you off, but it's the same in sports. Like I remember I was playing like JV baseball, and I think I hit a home run and untucked my jersey, like rounding second base to showboat a little bit. And my coach was like, "What the hell are you doing?" And then like I was like, "Well, I saw so and so do it. Like he's a captain. Like he can do whatever he wants. He's all league." I'm like, "All right, yeah, you got to wait a little bit until I can showboat." It's the same in sales. You can't really until you can prove that you can have the double phones and make all these calls. You can't really just start taking midweek, time off for yourself, right? Like that's not how it works.
No way.
Yeah, and to expand on that is like, what I see a lot is BDRs now can get they'll set up a meeting for you, but you get on the call and there's been no in-depth discussion with, or qualifying these people. And so you get on the phone, they're like, well, I got you the meeting. And I'm like, well, that's fine. I mean, you hit your metric per se, but a real BDR, you want to get as close to doing what an AE can do on that first call as possible. So take it as far down the sales cycle as you can before you turn it over. You're not just setting some guy up saying, or woman being like, hey, yeah, I just took your call, but I know nothing about your company. I know nothing about your product. That's what I see a lot today.
Well, how would you coach a BDR, Kolb, to work better with the AE and build that foundation?
Yeah, you got to have a common language, right? Like communication's key. And I think, I know our company, we're strong on the Medic. I don't know if you guys know Medic at all.
Yeah, very well.
So we've kind of adopted that just to see if we can have some, everyone on the same page as we start talking about accounts and, going through the sales cycle where we're at. And it's important if you can't answer, who's the economic buyer? What's the decision process look like? Who's involved? What are the metrics? I know I'm just saying what Medic is, but to that extent, I think that's really helped. When I talk to my BDR, I'm like, get as much information as that as possible. I know you're not going to get it all, but that should be your goal. And then I'll fill in the blanks on the next call or as we move through the sales cycle. But you should keep those questions in mind.
Well, one of the questions we always ask is what's the advice you would give to a BDR that wants to get into a closing role? And I think you just hit it. It's do as much of the closing role as you can before you have the closing role. If you can qualify the crap out of a company and make sure, like you said, you're at power, right? You're at that, or at least you have a path to the economic buyer. You've helped the customer identify a pain that you guys solve, right? And you can understand how that pain is showing up from a metrics perspective. You're only 2 or 3 steps away from being able to close a deal. You're going to get that AE role a lot faster versus the kid who's just set meetings because they have the right title on LinkedIn, right?
Right. And you nailed that. I mean, BDR I think I pretty much forced my boss staff to give me a raise or a promotion because I was just doing so much of it. And I was like, listen, like, why am I going to turn this over? The deal's done, and you can't do that for every product. But,
Right.
I've worked at, transactional sales at a company called Rapid Miner, to more obviously like selling an ideology of doing data science at Data Robot, to Anaconda, you're checking a box for using open, so I've been at all sort of forms of or different styles of selling, but I always encourage my BDR, go as far as you can. Don't, if you need help, I'm there for you. But, and I think that's important that your BDR knows that the AE trusts you. And if they don't, they're going to ask the right questions, and just take it as far as you feel comfortable. But your goal should be take it as far as you can each
The
time.
quality is huge too, Kolb. Like what you're saying is like quantity. Yeah, sure. You got the most meetings every month on your team, right? But like, if you're a BDR out there listening, or if you're becoming a BDR soon, you can set up a meeting with the security guard at the company, right? And that counts as a meeting. But if you can set it up with somebody who has some voice at the company and you can qualify it a little better, it's great for you. It's great for a deal, but it's really impactful for the AE, and they're going to start to notice, and they're going to say, wow, this BDR really can set quality meetings. And like you said, I was similar. They were kind of like pulled me out of the role. They were like, you're done doing that. You're doing the next role. Like, it was just like that obvious. So that's we haven't really had somebody talk about getting quality meetings. A lot of people talk about hitting your numbers a lot, but I think that's an important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also I think you gave great advice to the new AEs, because we work with such talented kids and hardworking and competitive kids, and a lot of them get promoted pretty quickly, right? We've had a kid go from BDR to AE in his second quarter at a large ASP complex cybersecurity company, right? Like, he's going from making cold calls for 90 days to closing $100,000 deals. And he was fortunate because he just did the BDR job. So he was working really well with the BDRs. But what you said about like, give them a little bit of, almost like give them some room to sink a little bit, but be there for them when they need your help. Like, I think that's a great AE BDR relationship where you're letting the BDR do a little bit more. You're not making them do your your hard work that you don't want to do, your busy work, but you're letting them actually do some of your job in a way, not because you don't want to do it, because you're trying to get them to be better. I love that.
Yeah, and it's the same thing for AEs with solution architects, right? Or sales engineers, right? Like, you got to be dependent upon them a lot of times for a lot of the technical stuff. But as my role is, or my job should be, to learn as much as that as possible, and to take that as far as possible in the sales cycle too, the technical questions, and then have my SE help me when I need it. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, and by the way, it gives you credibility with the customer when they ask you a fairly technical question and you're a sales guy and you can actually answer it. Or you can ask a really specific technical question. They're like, all right, this kid gives a shit, right? Like, that's huge. Mm-hmm. Moving over to sales leadership, right? Huge part of the job. It's one of the things I think why athletes are successful in sales is because they're used to the hierarchy of a coach and a captain and, having a leader and having a mentor. What you've seen a lot of sales leadership, Kolb. What do you think great sales leadership looks like? And how do you think athletes specifically want to be managed?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it goes back to what we first started talking about with choosing a company, right? Choosing your boss and choosing your manager is just as important. And I've been lucky. I've worked for the same sort of CRO, VP of sales, SVP. This is my fifth company with them, or it might be even sixth. And in between companies or roles, I've had other managers come in. And it just reinforced what I look for in a boss. And that's someone that's going to give me the autonomy that I need, to do what I want to do. Obviously, we all know I love golf, but you can't play golf year round where we live. So I sort of weight my work differently than probably the typical AE or someone that doesn't play golf or just doesn't live in New England. So having that flexibility, but also someone that's you feel like is sitting on the same side as the table as you, right? Like, I'm not sort of I don't like people managers per se. Someone that's going to look at your calendar and judge you off that. I think ultimately you're in sales, you got to close deals, you got to hit numbers, and that's first important, right? And as long as you're doing that, a manager should ask you, hey, what do you need to do your job well? There's other times where, like, the more the people manager, and this, I have seen AEs like need this type of person too. Is, hey, they're not organized, but they need to be able to have task oriented, like, filled days, right? Like, I want you to spend 2 hours blocking off sourcing names, doing that, and those types of managers, although not for me, do help a lot of people out. But it's I think the best manager is one that's going to help you close a deal rather than judge you if you don't close a deal. They don't ask, oh, well, what went wrong per se. You want someone to say, well, what can we do better? Where do you think we dropped the ball? And they do some of that homework with you, rather than someone just looking from the outside, looking in on a sales cycle that goes wrong and says, well, told you should have, So I've had both. So I think you want someone that feels like they're there for you, they're there to help, and they're not just there to, you're treated as a number, and if you don't hit your number, you're gone. I like someone to be kind of emotionally invested in their AEs.
That's cool. I didn't know you had the same CRO or SVP for 5 or 6 companies. That's pretty cool. You don't hear about that too much, but you do. You kind of follow people around and work if you like working for somebody at one company, it's going to translate.
Yeah, and his name's John Shepard, and he's actually. I applied to, this is like trying to get out of my first role as a BDR inside sales rep. They actually outsourced my platform. I was able to sell the cloud platform, and they outsourced it to consultants. And so I was looking to get back in a closing role. I interviewed for this job. They said, my requirements were too much at the time, but 4 months later, this guy calls me and said, come on in. I love athletes. He played tennis himself at Vanderbilt. So he was an athlete, and he kind of took me under his wing, trained me, and sort of, I've trusted him. So this is, I think, 6 companies have been together. We've both done like US based companies. We've done a couple companies in Israel together, which are obviously a different world. I'm not sure if you guys have ever worked for
Turbo
Israeli companies.
Turbo was Israeli founders.
So you know what I'm talking about. You live, you learn. I've seen a lot of them, and unfortunately, like, you always have to deal with look how many companies you've worked at. But I said, well, it means, if I'm in it for a Series A, Series B company, and I'm only there for a year to 18 months, well, that's what I specialize in right now. I got them either to a goal that they wanted to be at, and now I wanted to go chase and do it for someone else because that's what I like to do. Or, it's very hard, as you know, in startups. I mean, 12 months is like 5 years at like a big corporation. So there's always constant change, constant turnover at the executive level typically. I mean, I've been at 2 companies where the CEO has been either stepped down or let go, and you just know what happens, right? A new CEO is going to bring in their team, bring in their top sales guy. So you got to deal with the highs and the lows.
So, Kolb, I think a big thing about sales is having your first line boss be, someone you can trust. Is there a way for you, or how can a rep right now who's interviewing for a job, how can they figure out whether or not they enjoy working for their boss or the person they're interviewing with during the interview?
Yeah, I think I think it takes a little bit of a good judge of character on the interviewer's end, right, or the interviewee's end, and then as well as don't be afraid to reach out to people that are working for them already or have worked for them in the past. I mean, LinkedIn is a good tool. You can see where they've been. You can see some of the reviews about them. But I would say, ask work-related questions and work personal questions. You're going to have to ultimately spend a lot of time with this person, and they're going to kind of control your fate one way or another. So I think you don't be afraid to ask questions. Obviously, you don't want to get too personal, but ask what they're looking for in their reps. What do they expect? What's been your history? What's your typical turnover? How do you ask them how they deliver bad news, right? Like, when's the last time you fired someone? Like, how did that go? So like, I've had bosses that in the past that, like, they're going to let you go, but they're passive aggressive. And they're like, hey, let's just communicate this. It's not working out. it doesn't help either one of us. If I'm miserable and you're miserable, we'll like just figure it out. So I think don't be afraid to ask the right questions.
That's so true. I mean, that's what we train on is like the interview is a two-way interview. They're interviewing you to see if you're a fit. You're interviewing them to see if they're a fit. Is the leadership a fit? Is the product a fit? Is the culture a fit? Like those are the things you got to dig in on big time.
And you got to be real personable, and the judge of character is huge. It goes both ways too.
Totally.
One of the reps the top rep I interviewed years ago, he told me I was his hardest interview ever because he prepared for the interview. He knew everything that he was going to say. And the first thing I asked him is, what are you doing this weekend? And he said he didn't prepare for that. And he was like so caught off guard. And I just wanted to see if he was a normal person, It's kind of awkward when you get those questions, but too many times I think in interviews, people, they just revert back to numbers and the proper way to speak. And I don't think that translates too well in sales.
No, I always like to test the waters by swearing. I know it's like off the chain a little bit, or not everyone should do it, but I'm not going to probably drop an F-bomb, but shit or something, and just see how they react. I mean, shit, I can't hide who I am anyways. So It's either whether you like it or not, but I'm not going to fake it, because if I fake it and I get there and it's like, well, they thought I was one person, I'm another. It's like, oh, well, shit, I'm on my way out the door anyways. Then, right?
JR told me he used to test people. JR, what did you say you used to do? Like, ask, they're like, what's up, psycho, or something? Like, what was it?
No, I would come in the room. I was the last step for AEs and BDR candidates at Turbo and Commercial, and I would walk in the room and slap them out. I'd slap them on the back like a hello, and I'd be like, "What's up, you savage?" No matter who it was, just to see how they reacted, just to see can they handle themselves? Because that's, to your point, that's who I am. That's how I start every podcast with "What's up, kid?" I say "What's up, kid?" to my mom. I'm like, my mom calls me. I'm like, "What's up, kid?" Right? You got to bring your authentic self to this career. It's probably one of the most important things, right? We talk about guys put their tech sales voice on, and all of a sudden they're very professional, and you should see how we work with this API, right? It's no, talk about it how you would talk about it with someone that you're friends with. Exactly. Put on text.
Kolb, when did you get glasses? I don't have glasses, right? And, you see that a lot.
100%. So you mentioned Meta. Can you get, I'm curious, you've been doing this a long time. You know how to close deals. How do you approach the job? What are the habits, or what you would describe as the cornerstones of your approach to being a quota carrying senior account executive?
Yeah, I think it's very quickly become an expert in your own product, right? You got to do the homework. You got to know the competitive field, or what's out there, and what's the key differentiator in your platform. And it's not always easy. I think, the current company I'm at, we're still working this out. We're actually all out in Denver next week to even spend more time on this. But find out the key differentiators. Then you got to know who you're going to be selling to. So a lot of it is doing your homework and getting that pitch out as much as possible in sort of a safe way. I think as a senior account executive, I know I can maybe turn to a few people in my past at different companies and sort of get a feeler where I'm not, it's not sink or swim with them. I'm like, hey, I'm here now. This is my platform. What do you think? And then sort of, use the tools that you're given, or ask for the tools that can make you productive. A big one for me is SalesLoft. I like to do my work in bunches, at least a lot of my sourcing for, prospecting. So being able to leverage those tools, and make sure you're Salesforce, whatever CRM you're using, make sure you spend a lot of time in there when you're a new AE to figure out, who are the customers, look at the sort of the sales cycle and what it's taken to get them to be a customer, look at the conversations. And then ultimately, I would sit in on some calls, or if everything's recorded, so Zoom meetings, and get a feel for how other people are pitching it, and then try to create that story into my own. I think everyone kind of has their own way of how their products, was evolved or why your company was founded, but put it into your own words, put it in your own spin, and be consistent with your prospecting. I think it's a numbers game, we know. But again, if you have the expertise or the knowledge of what makes your product different, it's being persistent in trying to get in front of those right people. And when you do, have that pitch dialed in, and I always say lose as a team. You're better off losing as a team than losing as an individual. So don't be afraid to ask for help around your organization. If you need something, especially when it comes to the product, have, your product manager come in for a meeting if needed. One of our founders is a big time lawyer for open source. So when it comes to legal side of things, just don't be afraid to bring them in, because if the worst you can do is, you do your weekly sales meetings, they're asking how deals going. Oh, great. And then you get 3 weeks left of the quarter, it doesn't close, and no one knows why, So being transparent is another key to being a senior AE.
It doesn't surprise me that team selling thing is one of your great habits, because you talked about what you look for in a leader is somebody that isn't pointing at you and blaming you. When I was running a team at Turbo, I had this thing on my desk. It was this big boat. And I had these terracotta soldiers, and I had names on every terracotta soldier. And we would talk about a deal, and I would literally be like, all right, how has marketing helped you? And we'd put them on the boat. How has the channel helped you? Have you brought in Ben, the CEO, or Mo, the CFO? And the analogy I would use is listen, the deal is a boat. You're out in the water. It's either gonna sail or it's gonna sink. And the last thing you want to do if it sinks is have somebody sitting on the beach and pointing the finger at you. If everybody's on the boat and you lose the deal, it's a team loss. And that's the best way to approach managing a deal. So dude, I love that. That's unreal.
I like that. In the pitch too, Kolb, you're talking about getting your product story down. You mentioned it a lot. And I think in sales, a lot of people who are new to sales are always okay, I have to learn the pitch. I have to learn this. But it's basically can you tell a good story? Are you a good storyteller?
Exactly.
Right? And you two, I could sit on the couch at, 38 Carol and listen to you two tell stories all night. So, I mean, you might listen to me. I don't know if I can, get a full sentence out, but I think we can, all three of us can tell a good story, right? That's what it's all about. 100%.
Back then, you couldn't really understand what we were saying, but I know what you mean.
So you also mentioned,
as I say, you guys clean it up. Twisted tea here.
So now we'll spend the next half hour talking about Cape Week and what we were doing.
Yeah, right. Not enough time in the day, John.
I don't know if we're allowed back there, but so you talked, Kolb, about other salespeople at companies that you can kind of reach out to, and mentorship's a big part of the podcast. We ask a lot of people about mentorship. So are there any mentors you've had in your sales career, and what have you learned from them?
Yeah, I would say, that my current boss, John Shepard, really has done a lot for me up to this point as being an individual quota carrying person. I have managed some small teams here and there. I'm really looking to take that next step with this company in the next few weeks here. So we'll see if it gets done. But, and then I'll be even more dependent upon him in terms of how do you manage people? How do you like to manage people? And in doing more of the admin stuff that VPs have to do, right? The reporting, how do you talk to a board? How do you interact with, investors, that type of stuff, on a higher level, is something I'm looking forward to. But yeah, John Shepard's definitely helped me a lot. I think the other thing too is I have, a few friends in this world as well. I know, I have a pulse on what you guys are doing. I have a pulse on, all my friends that are sort of, whether we're acquaintances now or teammates at one point, but anywhere in the software world, it's we're bouncing around here and there a decent amount. So hitting them up and just asking them, why they made a move or what's going on, what are they seeing, whether it's going from data science was super hot 5 years ago when I was first getting into it, or 7 years ago. And then it's moved more towards security and cybersecurity and sort of having a pulse on what's going on. But I think having a group of mentors is always important. And I kind of have, different levels, right? So I have peers that I can kind of see as mentors or influencers. I have a boss that I would say has definitely been more of that, when you think of the mentor definition, that, as well as the first job I ever had, or software job, the founder is the CTO, this guy, Jeff Galino. He may be the smartest person I've like literally ever met. Like, he makes Brent Franklin look like Pee Wee Herman, like this guy's just a genius, and he's also one of like the best sellers too. So I lean on him a lot. He's at Coal Miner, and they're doing really well. But I'll hit him up every couple of months and be like, "Hey, what's going on?" And it's cool to see what he's doing and what he sees. But just speaking with him and talking with him about software in general or where it's going it's so educational, and it kind of motivates you to see what's next. I know we all get caught up in our everyday job, and it's cool that you guys are doing your own thing. But like when you're working for the man and you're trying to sell software and you're just pounding and it's not going well, it's very easy to pick up and like see what else, look over the fence, see what else everyone's doing. It's natural. And I think it's healthy too. I think you want to know what's going on because it either will motivate you. I'm again, motivated by money. So you want to make as much as you can. And to know what's working for other people, it may or may not work for you, but it doesn't hurt to know.
You got to get comfortable talking about being motivated by money. And I it's a little cliche in today's society, but like, listen, that's, call it what it is. Money equals freedom. And that's what we all want. So, you should be driven, especially if you want to get into sales, to make as much money as possible. That should be one of the most important things to you. And that's just the reality of it. And if you are, you're going to do the right things, right? You're going to care about the customer. You're going to become an expert in your product. You're going to learn the right skills and habits, because doing those things turns into a financial outcome, which is what's driving you.
Yeah. And again, you work for the customer more than you work for your own employer, right? I think you want to make sure the next time you knock on that person's door to sell them something, they're going to take your calls. Everyone remembers who you are, right? When something bad happens, and it's, unfortunately, I've been on the bad end of that, right? You sold something and product told you they were going to put something on the roadmap, or something was on the roadmap. It never gets delivered. Renewal comes around, you're not getting that deal done. So you got to work on behalf of your customer as well, too.
Yeah, that's a key thing.
You just gave me an idea. For a LinkedIn post. Thanks, Cobra.
And that was just to be clear, that was our first Pee Wee Herman shout out on the Merchants of Kings. So shout out Pee Wee. So
Diesel will appreciate it.
Love Pee Wee Herman. We got two final questions, Kolb. I'll ask the first one, but we talk on the podcast a lot about skills that make a salesperson elite. So curious to know, what is your skill that makes you elite as a salesperson?
Negotiating. I can get a pulse if I'm part of a deal, or I know what's going on, and as long as I've done my end of the job in terms of setting expectations and success criteria as we're going through the sales cycle, whether we're doing an evaluation or a POC or not, I'm pretty good at holding people accountable at the end and basically getting a deal done. Whether you got a day to get it done, a week, whatever. As soon as we start talking, all right, we're interested. But this is usually before you get to procurement, because that's a whole different type of negotiating. And frankly, I love messing with procurement people. Like, I know your job, I know how you get paid, right? So it's like, what are we doing here? You're not gonna be the one that definitely says yes or no. You're just getting whatever. But anyways, I love negotiating. And again, this is where you act on behalf of your customer too. If you're trying to get them to do a 1-year deal, but you have a product that value really takes 12 to 24 months to go through, be open to having that conversation. Make sure you ask them up front, what's your budget? What are you spending now? Here's what we expect to save you. Here's where, ROI, like, and just be comfortable with that and be confident. And ultimately, I think you can get something done. And again, you're usually selling twice, once to the line of business and once to procurement. But I love getting everyone at the table and making sure everyone walks away thinking they won the negotiation. That's a good negotiator.
So, Kolb, I know I said 2 more questions, but I'm curious because you are a great negotiator, in my opinion. Outside of experience alone, life experience or sales experience, any advice on how to get better at negotiating, like podcast, books, or any kind of outside advice?
Yeah, I think what is it? The Jordan Belfort's The Way of the Wolf. That's a pretty good one to read, right? I think I wouldn't say I'm like cutthroat negotiator. I'm just very stern. So I think hearing and listening to I'm not sure if I listen to too many podcasts besides obviously I listen to a lot of like I wouldn't say it's podcasts on my end. It's more reading books like Ben Mesrick books, like sort of books that are interesting but do talk about business deals, like Moneyball or Bringing Down the House, like stuff like that. I think reading and just seeing the style. I mean, there is a book, The Art of Negotiating. I don't know. I think, but everyone needs to find their own style. But I think the best way to get good at negotiation isn't actually at the final table, right? It's setting up to be able to negotiate is what I see negotiating, right? And what I mean by that, again, is when you're engaged with a prospect, you're writing down and you're reiterating to them and showing them this is what you want or this is what you're looking for. Here's your pain. This is how we're going to solve it. And as soon as you check off that, hey, do you agree we solved that? Boom, then you're in the right place to start asking for their business. But don't be afraid to ask. That's where I think I've seen the sort of the mediocre sales reps. They're just okay with having meeting after meeting after meeting, and then, hey, let's go get someone from a different line of business in the organization, see if we get them to champion this. Whereas just ask for the business and then get to the negotiation table, and you can almost always get something done. But that's why I like working in startups too, right? I think you should be like CFOs and the financial side of the house. That you should be trying to get as many deals off the street as possible, and then work on your business model around customer retention and ARR after that. But when you're first going to market with you should get as many logos as possible, and the negotiation piece should be pretty easy, right? So getting better at it just takes practice.
Totally. All right, last question, buddy. And I know you got to run to Indian Pond, so we'll get through it quick. We're recording this on a Saturday morning, right? We're recording this on Saturday morning. Yeah, it's Saturday. You got a great weekend ahead of you. So we always used to say, like, there's a lot of people that play hockey, but there's not a lot of people that are hockey players, right? There's a difference between selling software and being a software sales professional. And we think that being a pro is the highest praise you can give someone. So last question, what does being a pro in sales mean to you, Kolb?
Yeah, it's being adaptable, being agile, being open-minded, smart, and being able to have an idea of how the sales cycle should go or how you expect it to go, but be able to move quickly when it doesn't go your way. It's being persistent. It's being willing to ask for help, or it's also being able to say, I don't know. But it's ultimately, you do what it takes to get the job done. Don't tell me how rough the water is, just get the boat in type deal. And to be sort of like, you got to be likable as a sales pro, right? No one wants an asshole on their team. So it's being able to work as an individual within a team environment is what makes a real sales pro.
I love it.
Love it.
Dude, awesome convo, Brian. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
This wraps up this episode of Merchants of Change. If you enjoyed this episode, the most meaningful way to say thanks is to submit a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're interested in working with us, please come find us at www.shiftgroup.io.